everyone. So my name is Jose Luis Moctezuma, and I'm an editor at Make Magazine. I'm very happy to start off this event for Eduardo Rabasa, who's an author and Sexto Piso editorial director. This event is hosted by Christian de Bordeaux, who I will introduce very soon. But first, a word or two about the Lit y Luz Festival, which this is one of the events. So I want to, besides thanking you for being here, I want to thank our partners, including the National Endowment for the Arts and Roosevelt University's Creative Writing MFA. Thank you, of course, to Christian for hosting and arranging the event. Held each fall in Chicago and each winter in Mexico City, the Lit and Luz Festival of Language, Literature, and Art is a unique series of readings, conversations, performances, and multimedia presentations featuring renowned authors and visual artists from Chicago and Mexico City. More than a dozen events will take place in galleries, college auditoriums, classrooms, bookstores, and museums throughout Chicago. The festival concludes on Saturday, this Saturday, with the live magazine extravaganza show finale at Cope Prosperity Spear, featuring debut multimedia collaborations between Mexican and Chicago-based artists. Please grab a program, which is just outside on the table, and check out our amazing participants and events. All events are free, except for Saturday's finale, but it's worth it, believe me. Where Rabasa will also debut a collaboration with Chicago artist Danny Giles, so don't miss that. We recommend you to grab your ticket today at litluz.org. So Rabasa's book, A Zero-Sum Game, will be available at the Saturday finale. So if there are no copies here or not enough, you could certainly buy and purchase them at the extravaganza on Saturday. Buy it and definitely get it signed by the author. So now I'm going to introduce Christian de Bordeaux. So Christian is the author of Tough Aloma from Rescue Press 2015. And The Awful Possibilities from Featherproof Books 2010. He's the director of the MFA program in creative writing at Roosevelt University. Let's have a hand for Christian.
Thanks, Jose Luis. And thank you all for coming to hear from and speak with Eduardo Rabasa, and thanks especially to the Lit and Luz Festival, of which we're proud to be a long-running sponsor. In most literary gatherings, I can use the term systems novel and be confident that it will evoke the same object among my listeners. Doorstop tomes by postmodern heavy hitters, Thomas Pynchon, Don DeLillo, William Vollmann, David Foster Wallace, Roberto Bolaño. These novels, many of them very good, traverse continents. They deal with networks of power that are usually so remote from their hapless characters as to seem indecipherable. The deep state, the Illuminati, aliens, rogue postal systems. Systemic power in these novels is enough to make every character, and sometimes the authors themselves, sound paranoid. With A Zero-Sum Game, Eduardo Rabasa has created something that I can only describe as a systems novel, but which is unlike any other novel I've ever read. First, because rather than spanning the globe, this book takes place almost entirely within a suburban housing complex, and its action revolves around the election of the neighborhood association. Second, because the system of power he describes in such detail will be immediately recognizable to anyone reading it. The system goes by many names that no one, least of all its advocates, can agree on: managerialism, technocracy, neoliberalism, or in this case, quietism in motion. But we all know what it looks and acts like, what it feels to live with or under. But finally, A Zero-Sum Game distinguishes itself from the conventional systems novel in that, even with its forays into wild, outlandish satire, and its willingness to discourse when necessary at great depth on theory and ideas, it is deeply concerned with its characters because it's deeply concerned with us. A Zero-Sum Game seems desperate to show us how our system of hyper-individualism paradoxically dehumanizes us. It has been compared to most of the major dystopian canon, 1984, Brave New World, Animal Farm, but it doesn't operate as fable or allegory. For anyone who paid attention to the US's most recent election, it's perfectly naturalistic. If anything, it's prophetic. Eduardo Rabasa is the founding editorial director of Sexto Piso, Mexico's most prominent independent publishing house and winner of the 2004 International Young Publisher of the Year Award. He studied political science at Mexico's National University, where he graduated with a thesis on the concept of power in the works of George Orwell. He writes a weekly column for the national newspaper Milenio and has translated books by authors including Morris Berman, George Orwell, and Somerset Maugham. A Zero-Sum Game is Rabasa's debut novel and was originally published in Mexico by Sear Plus. He was named one of the top 20 Mexican writers under the age of 40 by Hay Festival, the British Council, and Conaculta as part of their Mexico 20 project. He currently resides in Mexico City. Welcome, Eduardo Rabasa.
Hi, thank you so much for coming here, and I want to thank the festival, Little Lost Festival, for inviting me, and Roosevelt University, and thank you so much, Christian, for this kind introduction and careful reading of the book. I'm really happy and moved to be here. So I'm going to read a small section of the book. It's not the beginning, because I think the beginning is a bit boring, maybe. Not boring, but yeah, maybe. I'm going to read a passage that I've read before, and I think it works more or less well by itself. And it has to do with something that unfortunately is maybe the most urgent political and social theme in Mexico right now, which is drug dealing and the violence that it creates. In Mexico, there's been practically a civil war for the last 10 or 15 years. There's been like more than 100,000 people killed, and 20,000 more are disappeared. And so the drug dealers are obviously like the villains in this story, but it's also the case that they usually come from very poor backgrounds, and often they don't have many more choices rather than go into this. So it's a complex subject. So in the book there is a character, and it's the passage that I will read, that arrives as a poor boy to the housing complex, which is called Villa Miserias. So this passage more or less evokes how he transforms from this into like becoming like the drug dealer in the community. So I'm going to read that passage. One of the keys to quietism in motion was precisely the fact that it included motion. G.B.W. Ponce had demonstrated that ascent of the social ladder was accompanied by an acceptance of the beliefs of the new wrongmates. The members of the former us immediately became them. This in itself was not particularly important. What did matter was ensuring the changes of status were visible, making it clear that the only barrier to excellence was looking back at you in the mirror each morning. Celon Perdium's favorite example for highlighting the possibilities of social advancement was Mauricio Mazo. Mazo arrived in Villa Miserias by accident while still in his puberty. He was living with other children in a sewer, earning a living by entertaining passengers in the metro. On the floor of the subway car, he would lay out a t-shirt covered with pieces of broken glass and roll around on them. His skin was like a bloodied sheet of sandpaper, adorned with a maze of raised scars. He withstood the hardships of his profession by inhaling the glue supplied by his boss each night when he reported in. But that irascible tyrant only let the boys keep enough of their earnings for a couple of tacos and a soda. One time, Mauricio Mazo overdid the glue and came out of the metro feeling very disoriented. In search of somewhere to shelter from the rain that was making his wounds burn, he jumped over the wall surrounding Villa Miserias and took refuge among the garbage containers, where he competed with the stray dogs for a share of the leftovers recently discarded there. Eating a piece of fat on the bone only left him hungrier than ever. Then he stuck his head into a container in the hope of striking lucky and found something better than food: a bag of marijuana some parents had found in their teenage daughter's bedroom. He improvised a pipe from an empty water bottle, reactivated his glue-induced stupor with a couple of puffs, then lay down among the trash to gaze into the density of the clouded night sky. A group of kids passed by on their way to a party and immediately recognized the smell. They followed the scent until they came across Mauricio, sprawled out, absorbed, firmly grasping his bottle in his right hand. He seemed to hear them say something, but the words formed waves in the air that broke before they became comprehensible. The most resolute of the kids opened his finger one by one to liberate the weed, leaving in his hand a bill equivalent to 2 weeks' honest toil from Mauricio. He managed to close his fist on it before falling exhausted into a deep sleep. The following morning, Mauricio went on a spree with his unexpected earnings. He went to the public baths to wash for the first time in weeks. The crusts of grime were stubborn, and without his coating of filth, the woman at the cash register didn't recognize the brown-skinned, wily kid who came out. He bought a pirated t-shirt with the circular logo of a famous punk band and spent his last coins on a breakfast consisting of a chocolate-flavored concha soaked in atole. Maso decided it was time to become independent of his guild and start working on his own, even if it meant renouncing his daily ration of glue. He sought out a stretch of the metro system far from the monopoly of his previous organization, and at night went back to sleep among the trash in Villa Miserias. With his savings, he bought a blanket, which he carefully hid each morning before sneaking out to work. Juana Mecha suspected something was going on when she began to find bloody t-shirts in the trash. One day she arrived earlier than usual and managed to grab the arm of the frightened Mauricio before he could make a run for it. Vigorously shaking her broom as she walked, she spat out, "Better to eat humble pie than live like this." Maso agreed to work as her assistant. His task consisted of separating out the trash for recycling before the truck arrived to mix it all up again. Mecha lent him a thin mattress and a pillow slip stuffed with a green housecoat. She regularly came by to take him to a leftovers canteen. In the afternoon, before setting out on her long journey home, she would give the kid a pat on the head, saying nothing more than, "Behave yourself." That was when Mauricio Maso's second shift began. With increasing frequency, the youths began to return to request more supplies. The first time, it took him a few days to find out what turned out to be oregano. When the unwary kids smoked it, none of them wanted to be the only one to own up to its lack of effect, so they pretended to be high as kites. Mauricio had kept some back for himself, and on realizing he had been conned, he changed his supplier. His clients congratulated him on the potency of his new crop. They were soon requesting powders and pills. His efficiency produced a rapid expansion of his client base. Anorexic models bought amphetamines from him. Hangover hippies danced to the beat of the sledgehammers on his acid. As part of his transformation into a businessman, Maso set himself the rule of only consuming his own merchandise. His appearance was the first thing to change. He smartened up and acquired the first pair of the iguana skin boots that would become his trademark style. He took his rest on a real mattress and bought a portable, battery-operated television set. Every night he went to bed in the narrow space between two garbage containers, watching the late-night repeats of primetime cartoons. He got hold of a sheet of acrylic and suspended it like a roof when it rained. He had never before lived in such comfort. One night, he was woken by a slight tug on his gray tweed pants. The light of his torch showed a female client kneeling beside his mattress. A few days before, she had bought supplies from Mauricio for a party her bosses, advertising executives, were throwing to celebrate a lucrative contract for snack commercials. Speaking at full speed, her jaw juddering, she told him that they had run out of supplies, and the party was just getting going. Did he have any more? The thing was that they had run out of cash. What could they do? Still sleepy, Mauricio had hardly time to process the situation when he felt an electric charge rising towards his crotch. The torch went out at the same time as his zipper came down, liberating his hard-on. He felt a hand skillfully exploring, then the moistness of a mouth initiating him. Overwhelmed by pleasure, he rummaged in the garbage until he found the sack where he kept his stock. He extracted a few small bags without counting them, and the girl left triumphantly. A new method of payment had just been set up. There was one obstacle in the way of his frenetic business career. Joel Taimado became aware of the activity at strange hours around the trash. When he saw Maso going out on an order, Taimado, who is the security chief of the housing complex, took a look around his territory. He was about to admit defeat when he noticed an anomaly. In one of the overflowing containers, there was a slight bulge. He dug around in the bags, smearing his uniform in the thick liquid pouring from them, until he met with a diagonally placed plank, camouflaged to match the color of the receptacle. As soon as he raised it, his jaw dropped with the excitement of his find. Maso's cash contained his merchandise, his savings bound in rubber bands, his television, radio, and torch, his growing wardrobe, and the old photo of Juana Mecha he placed under his pillow each night. All this under the protection of a heavy-duty pickaxe and a Swiss Army knife. Taimado closed the lid of the container and treated himself to a first fix right there. As a finishing touch, to leave no doubt about the person responsible for the confiscation, he pasted on the photo of the sweeping woman. When Maso returned from his corps, he heard singing coming from the room, known informally as the Chamber of Murmurs, where the security squad kept their things. In a melancholy mood, Taimado and his colleagues were singing along, out of tune, to his old radio. The Black Punches, which are the security squad, the Black Punches were showing the effects of several hours of drinking cheap liquor, with the addition of the white avenues of cocaine snorted from their truncheons. They were vying to see who could do the whole line in one go. One of them was out for the count in a corner, having attempted to organize a bit of fun. It was a homespun version of those games where the participants hold hands and a machine administers mild electric shocks, causing the muscles to contract until someone can't bear any longer and drops out. As he didn't have the appropriate equipment, once the circle had been formed, he asked one of his companions to use his electric prod to administer a shock to the back of his neck, thinking that the effect would be shared equally between them all. This obedient colleague happily let leash the fury of the prod, intending to stop when the chain was broken. The recipient of the shock, his brains nearly burned to a crisp, reeled to the sound of the guffaws from the other, who were soon able to attest to his body's zero capacity as a conductor of energy. The entertainment came to an end when he stopped moving. The people holding his hands let go and he fell face down on the table, smoke coming from his ears. Between tears and laughter, they slapped his back in appreciation of the show and dragged him to the corner to sleep it off. Every so often, Taimado asked him to check he was still breathing. Some prankster shaved his eyebrows and made up his face, without even occurring to anyone to wonder why a member of the security squad would have the necessary cosmetics among his personal belongings. With enviable calm, Maso turned and left to check out what he already suspected. He discovered trash scattered on his bed. When he opened up his cache, he found just a transparent piece of card lying in a pool of multicolored liquid. The image on the photo had washed out. He had no desire to throw it out or replace it with another, not even to rinse it to get rid of Taimado's acrid smell. He would continue to put it under his pillow each night. Thank you.
And I want to start with questions about your book, but I also want to ask about your experience as a publisher, if that's all right. But first, I wanted to ask you, you introduced your reading by saying that the first part of the book was boring. I don't agree with that at all, by the way. But it is a really unusual beginning. I mean, you have a very, very long section of the book that is largely a description of a system of social organization and how it came to be, right? And I wanted to ask, because I haven't seen that done before, what was your impulse? Did you know that you were doing something that's, uncommon, or?
No, it's funny because when the book came out in the U.S. last year, there were like a few reviews, and most of them, they were like good reviews in general, but most of them complained about the structure of the book, that it was like very chaotic, and I agree with this. But the reason for this is that I wasn't really planning on writing a book. Unless a fiction book, like as you said, I'm a publisher. That's like my main job, and writing a novel was not an ambition that I had. But it happened because of a very deep personal crisis on two levels. Like one more abstract in the sense of feeling some uneasiness with the world we live in and with the narrative of the times and with the system that we live in, and it was also combined with a very, very deep personal crisis. For which I tried, before writing, everything that I could to solve it. Like I went to therapy, I did yoga, I went to magnet therapy, I even went to a witch. Yeah, but she wanted me to kill a rooster. And so my last resort was turning into writing, because what I wanted to answer, and it might not be evident, but to me, this is what this book is like what happens when an individual is disconnected between his mind and his body. Again, on these two levels, with the reality he lives in, and also with his personal life. So when I started to write the book, it was my attempt to answer this question, and I wasn't thinking about publishing it, even finishing it. I didn't know if I was going to finish it, because again, it was like a personal exploration. So I don't know, it just came out like that, because I was trying to first try to set up like the place where the story would happen, and try to reflect maybe in a microcosm way all these features of social or socio-political life that are around us, that to me feel like very suffocating. So I guess that's why the first part is like that, and it's funny because even now that it's about like these stories that take place in the housing complex, and the main character Max is not very present in that first, I don't know, 70 or 80 pages, but in the first draft he was even less present. But I had a friend tell me like, man, it's been 30 pages and the protagonist is nowhere to be seen. So I had to like insert him a bit more into the story to try to not, I don't know, to not let the reader lose himself too much. But the reason why it's like that is there is no reason. I mean, it's just the way it came out, and it is a chaotic book because that's how my mind was at the time, and that is how I think it's the times that we live in. And I don't know, or at least me, I mean, maybe other people could do it, but I couldn't write like a linear and neat book about this, because I think it's craziness, and I think that's what is reflected in that part of the book.
Yeah, chaotic book is absolutely appropriate for our times. I want to follow that up, because one of the things that I kept thinking about while reading the book is part of what you are describing is how our current political system forces this hyper-individualism that actually ends up atomizing us. And so, I mean, one would think theoretically that the answer would be for individuals to band together to resist something like this, right? But at the same time, your book describes like a very intense, and you describe your own individual crisis, but the book is about both big social movement and the plight of the individual. Is there a way to reconcile that in fiction? Is your book as far as that can be taken, or is there a way of showing the pathos of the individual, but then also an answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very good question, and it's come up like a few times since the book was published, and in interviews, like people would say like is there a way out? Is there I don't know, an answer? I don't know. And people would say like, oh, this is a very pessimistic book, and I say maybe, but I think that in current times, I think that pessimism is really a form of realism, because it's very tough to envision, for me at least, any way to reconcile these things. And as you were saying, like it would seem more or less easy to say, okay, so let's come together as individuals or even as minorities, but I think it's very difficult at the moment because of the narrative of the times, and because even from the time we're born, we are, at least in the Western world, we are taught that competition is a good thing, that selfishness is a good thing. So it's very tough to like come up with these values and then to join forces to like fight the system. So for me, the book was a way to try to show this gap between the discourse of the time and the reality that takes place on the individual level, you know.
All right. I have to provide a little context for this next question for those of you who haven't read it. The overall plot of the book is it's basically about who gets to run for election, and the book's stated answer is that it doesn't matter, and that they're pre-chosen. But the struggle in the book is that one person decides to run when he hasn't been authorized to run. I'm oversimplifying. It's a 400-page book, but I wanted to ask: did that impulse, did that conflict in the book start from theory, or did it start from a given historical situation that you're aware of, or was it just something like, hey, I'll start with this guy running for election?
I think it does come a bit from theory, because my background is in political science, and I like thinkers that state that like the structures, like maybe even the old Marxist concept that the structures, the economic structures mostly, but not only, end up determining the outcome of a particular society. And in that sense, and obviously this is like another question that comes out like very often is like, does the book take place in Mexico? Because it's never stated. And I will say that yes and no. I mean, yes, in the sense that it is a very Mexican book in the language, like the way the characters speak, in the way they relate to each other, in the way they treat the workers, in many things. But I didn't want to set it in Mexico because I think it has more to do with the narrative of the times, and that at least in Latin America, it could work in other countries of Latin America, and I think also more and more in the so-called developed world. I think it's like turning also towards that. So I think that there is some theory in that, in the sense that I think that elections, it's not that they don't matter. I mean, of course they do matter, but they matter to some extent because we mostly have to choose between the same things. So it wasn't like a particular historical situation, and I always say this, and it sounds like a joke, but it's not. There is a chapter of The Simpsons, an episode of The Simpsons that I think has a lot to do with this, and it's, you know, these Halloween episodes when they have like these monsters or whatever, and there is one in which the extraterrestrials, there is the U.S. campaign between Bill Clinton and Bob Dole, and so the extraterrestrials abduct them and impersonate them, but Homer sees the whole thing. So towards the end, there's a debate, and he pulls out the mask and says, "No, these are not the Kandias, these are the extraterrestrials." And they say, "Yeah, we are the extraterrestrials, but it's a two-party system, and you have to vote for one of us." And so one of them wins and enslaves the whole human race. And I think that is more or less what we are living. And I think that is, at least in Mexico, to some extent, and that was the main impulse for the book, because we live in a democracy and we are apparently to choose, but we get to choose between things that are mostly the same. So that was like the main idea behind this.
Okay. Actually, I want to follow that up, because have you been asked since the U.S. election of 2016 about its relation? This book was published well before last year's election, but I mean, there's a reading of our most recent presidential election that you could do where the whole thing is a fight between who gets to run and who doesn't, right? I mean, both in the primaries and then later in the election itself. Has anybody asked about your take on not the results, which I think are probably fairly clear based on what you've already said, but on the structure of the election itself? And because in his book, the rogue guy who decides to run puts on all these spectacles, right? And our election was more spectacular than usual last year.
Yeah, I think it has to do with, and I think this is something that Donald Trump really gets of, this idea of politics as a spectacle, and even maybe as reality TV, and also the fact that, because in the book, the buildings that have richer inhabitants have more of a say in the outcome of the election, and I think that is like completely the case, that money has become like a major influence in elections. I read once that I think in the U.S. to run for Senate, you have to be able to have like at least $1 million. I think that's like pretty much a definition of a plutocracy. I mean, but not even as a metaphor. I mean, like only if you have this amount of money, you can run. So I think that. And I think I was telling you that last year when I came to do a mini tour for the book, I had an event in New York the day after the election. And everybody was so depressed, like only my very loyal friends showed up, and I understand it completely, so it's, in my mind, it's like a bit tied to what happened here last year, yeah.
I'm going to switch fully to craft for a second. I mean, stylistically, this book swings all over the place. It can be wild satire 1 minute, it can be a near essay another minute, a fairy tale, and then fairly realistic psychological action. Did you sit down and say, today I'm going to treat this way, or was it completely intuitive as you were developing the story, or?
Yeah, I think it was intuitive in the sense that I think that depending on the bit of the book, there was a specific, well, for me, I mean, maybe it doesn't work, but that's the way it felt to me. There was a specific way of telling the story, and also since it's a bit of a dense book, I think that, for example, the passages when there are like these children's stories provide some relief for the reader, and maybe and some hope, like for 20 pages, you can go into this children's story and forget about the complex or the tough reality that encompasses the rest of the book. And also since it's built like, or it's meant to be built like as a microcosm, I wanted it to be like a polyphonic book, because I think that if it was just like a linear narrative or only a third-person narrative, it wouldn't have this microcosm and a bit of a chaotic effect. And in the last part of the book, where there's a political campaign, and so of 11 days, and so it's divided by the journal of the protagonist, and that was important to me because it's the first time. I mean, like the narrator is in and out of his mind, so the narrator is very closely to him. But I wanted to just give him voice to try to show his anguish, and then there is sort of a love story or failed love story, and the woman that he's in love with is a journalist, and she's covering the campaign. So by having her write some articles of the campaign, it was for me like a counterpoint between his journal or his point of view and the way she was seeing things. So those were the reasons, like behind every change in style, to try to fit a specific situation.
Let's switch modes and ask about publishing now. This one's back up from my MFA students. This is an extremely political book, and to the good as far as I'm concerned. But did anybody caution you? You're a debut novelist. Your first book is coming out, and it places you very specifically in a social place, and it does not welcome people of other political beliefs and stuff like that. I know in my background, if I had written something like this for my first book, my own mentors would have been like, don't. You know what I mean? Did anybody push back on you, or?
No, and I think it has to do with a few things. The first is the thing I was telling, that I wasn't like planning on writing the book, and in the Mexican publishing industry, unfortunately, but that's the way it is. It's relatively easy to publish a book if you are like well connected or if you know people. And since I had been in publishing already for 10 years, I knew like many people. But since this book was very, very important to me and very personal, and it really meant like for me the end of this crisis that I was talking about. So I was really attached emotionally to the book. So I didn't want it to get published for wrong reasons. So I thought if it's a crap book and nobody wants to read it, it's okay, because it had already like served me for other reasons. So I gave it to a friend that I very much trust, like a poet and an essayist, and I told him like this, like please read it, and if it's no good, just let me know, and it's okay. And so he read it and he liked it. He also made like very good observations. So like that, for me, that was like the permission I had to like try and publish a book. But then I was facing the same dilemma of, okay, where should I send it? Because the same thing, I didn't want it to get published for the wrong reasons. So I chose like a very, very tiny publisher, like these anarchist crazy guys from Oaxaca, and with whom I really didn't have much relationship, and I sent it to them, and they liked it, and they don't really care about the market or your career or anything, so they just said, yeah, let's just publish it like that. I mean, I don't think me or them or anybody was thinking in terms of this is going to place you here or here. It was just like, let it come out.
Now you're available all over the world. So, all right, nice. This kind of ties in a little bit. How you had an established career as an editor by the time you had, even by the time you started writing this book, right? How did you balance that?
Well, it's been like, for me, maybe the most complicated part, and not necessarily in the most obvious way, because like in terms of working, I write very early in the morning. I get up like at 5 or 5:10 to write, because I don't know why, it's the time where my mind is clear, whatever. So I write for 2 or 3 or 4 hours, whatever, and then I go to work. So that was like very neatly divided, and also I didn't tell almost anybody that I was doing the book. So it was like a secret activity for me in the mornings, and then I would like go off to work. But then after it got published, obviously it stopped being a secret, because the book was there. And it's brought me like many problems within my own publishing house, because I don't know if in the US it's the same thing, and I know there are some editors that have published books or even literary agents, but in the Mexican publishing world, it's like a very vertical and hierarchical world, and obviously the author is on top, then the editors and blah blah. So it was as if I had like changed them to another level, which I don't see it like this. This is not my vision of things, but it's more or less how it's perceived. So it's created a lot of problems, and also with my authors, like with the authors of my publishing house, most of them really hated the idea that I published the book. I don't know why, because I mean, I didn't like pay any less attention to them. I didn't start working with it. I mean, as far as I can see, nothing changed, but I don't know, really, the publishing part of it has, I mean, it's brought me many good things, like being here, for example, which is amazing. But in terms of the reality in Mexico, it's brought me also a lot of problems. It was like a touchy subject, but I'm not exactly sure why.
They see you as competition now.
Yeah, maybe, but it's very strange.
All right. Well, let me follow that. This is my last question for you. You just told me that you have just published your second novel. Can you tell us about it and whether there's any plans for it to be available in English translation? Or?
Yeah, I published my second novel. It's called Cinta Negra, which would be like black belt, as in martial arts, but it's not about martial arts. It's a satire of the corporate world, and because this is something that actually exists, like in the corporate world, like with the management theory and all of these things, there is a system of belts, like in martial arts, and so you're white belt, blue belt, and the highest is a black belt. But I read books about this, and it's funny because nobody really knows what it's about. So it has to do more or less with solving problem capacity. But to me, it seemed more like a theological thing, you know, like a goal to achieve or like to devote your life to, but without really knowing what it is. So the protagonist of the book, who works in a firm called Soluciones, which means solutions, which is a firm that solves problems. Like, for example, there is a Buddhist, there is a fighter, like a boxer that becomes Buddhist and he doesn't want to fight anymore, so his manager brings him so that they fix him. And the protagonist is fixated upon achieving the black belt status, and he like puts all of his life, his personal relationship, his love, his like everything towards this goal, and in the process he becomes like well, he was already a despicable man, but he becomes even more despicable because all of his ethics, his morals, everything is devoted to achieving this goal. So I think that in a way it's a book like connected to this one. It's much easier to read, like it's much more linear, it's much less chaotic. I also think it might be better written because I did have more of a clear plan of what I was doing and where was this. I didn't have it, so yeah, it came out, and it's gonna be. It's already gonna come out in Germany and Italy, but in English so far no, because the Vellum, the publisher is going through some changes. So for the moment, he said he couldn't do it. I hope it will come out, but I don't know.
All right. Does anybody out here have any questions?
Yeah. No, I mean, the reason that I didn't want to like set it like in specific Mexico, like contemporary Mexico, was because more or less because of what you're saying, that it would bring to the reader like a clear image of a place. I think it would like more or less tie it to a specific reality, and I didn't want to do that because I thought that that I wanted the book to be more about like the narrative of the times, and that ideally the book or the reader, like readers from different parts of the world, not only from Mexico, could feel identified with specific aspects of the book. And also, for example, like they've asked me before, like, did you do any research for the book? And the answer is no, because most of the stuff does come from everyday reality. For example, in the passage that I read of the guy that puts the glasses in the metro, and this really happens in the subway of Mexico City, and it's quite brutal. I mean, they do this so you give them money, and you don't want to give them money, so they stop, because it's brutal to see someone smashing their back on a piece of broken glass. So I think that in that sense, I think it's a very Mexican book, in that it incorporates these aspects of Mexican reality, but for the other reasons, it's also, in my opinion, it could be set in some other places. Maybe this specific thing doesn't happen, but other things of the book, like more general, I think would be present in other places.
Did you have trouble with transitioning? I didn't read the book, so when you transitioned, did you transition like from just chapters, or did you transition, like for example, like the tone or like the setting, or did you have trouble transitioning from like reality to fantasy or so forth?
No, I think not, because I didn't really know what I was doing, so I just yeah, so I just like did whatever came out, and I don't know, because obviously one thing is what I could have tried to do, another thing is what the reader experiences, but in my opinion, the book is divided into 3 big sections, and within each section there are like small chapters. So the chapters are like, or pretend to be like small anecdotes or stories, and when it ends, you can change to a completely different setting. So that's why it's divided by these small chapters. And then there are, as Christian was saying, some changes in narrative style, or again at the end, the protagonist narrates himself a few of the episodes, like because it's what I was saying, it's his diary, but I don't know, maybe it was ignorance or it just felt natural, but I thought that was the way, but I didn't like think much about it. It's just like the way it came out. And that's why I explained it so badly, because there was no reason behind it.
Was there a point at which you were writing, you're like, oh, this is gonna be a big book? Like, when did you know that you had a good idea for a book? When you were writing, since you said it was intuitive, when did you like think that this book was gonna be like this long and the idea was fully fleshed out and everything?
I think it's a very good question, and the funny thing is that I did have like more or less a general idea of what was going to happen. Like I knew, for example, I had like the first image of the book is the protagonist looking at himself in the mirror and basically like not recognizing himself, like to illustrate this, that I was saying, that he feels he's not in his body, so to speak. I knew there would be like this romantic infatuation where when he tries to have sex with the woman he's obsessed with, he loses his sight, so he cannot see her. So I knew that was going to be there, and I knew that there was going to be like an election towards the end of the book. So you could say that I had like the basic structure, the basic art, and then so writing was feeling what happened between those two moments, and many of especially in the first part, which is made up of many stories and many characters that come up. Of that, I really had no idea. It was just something that was coming up every day, and very often it was a surprise to me if a particular character showed up, or this happened. But I think that the thing that more or less, if you can say so, about this book kept it contained was that I already knew how it was going to end. So I didn't know exactly when I would reach the ending, but once I reached the part of the campaign, I said, okay, I am going to end this book, which wasn't clear like in the first pages, but does that make sense?
Yeah.
Time for maybe one more question. Christina?
How do you think your experience working in the publishing arena has impacted your writing now? Because you said before you were with the novel, your workplace was the publishing area. So how would you say that influenced your writing of this novel?
Because you couldn't do the second one in secret, right?
No, yeah, exactly. I think it's also a good question because I have mixed feelings about like comparing the first book and the second book, because I think you could probably say that the second book, especially from a reader perspective, is a better book. Maybe you could say so, because it's less chaotic and it reads better. And I mean, I got a little bit better at doing it, but I think it has to do more or less, and this is the part that I don't like so much, with what you were just saying, that like, again, since I wasn't even, I didn't even know if I was gonna finish this book, if it was gonna be any good, if it was gonna be, like, the only person who read this book, like, the first person who read this book was my girlfriend of the moment, and she wasn't too encouraging. She was like, well, yeah, it's a very specific subject, so we'll see. And so I really didn't have much in mind about what would happen if it got published. But then again, yeah, with the second one, there are expectations, and I've gotten some feedback from readers, and my girlfriend was nicer the second time around. And I have to say, she's not my girlfriend anymore, in large part because of the second book. So I think, so I think that that in this one, it was like, it didn't affect me much. I mean, at some level maybe, but not much, because, but in the second one, like, I was more conscious of the fact that I was writing a book, and that I had to finish it, and it had to compare well with the first one, maybe. So I think in the second one, it did affect me more, in a good way, again, because of the readers. For the reader, is less challenging to read. But I also think that, like, losing some of the chaos and spontaneity of this book, I feel a bit conflicted about it. But I think you can only do the first book once, no?
Thank you, Eduardo.
Thank you so much.